hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson on the Iowa caucuses as the Republican candidates make their way to New Hampshire. There are a few things to be learned from it, but not that much. Also, more on the billionaire investor Bill Ackman, the one who has been leading the push for change at Harvard and MIT and elsewhere. Who is this guy? What's motivating him to do what he does? He gave a recent interview to CNBC that I want to pick apart, and I'll show you what I mean. .com/nightlightjoshua to follow me on social and to put a few dollars in the online tip jar. Well, I'm outside, and that does not feel cute or fun. I'm grateful that it is not nearly as cold here as it had been, but it is good to see y'all. I know that some of you have been dealing with bitter cold in various parts of the country. Nora, oh my goodness, I see Nora, hello. 17 degrees Fahrenheit there, up from 20 this morning, up 20 from this morning. How's your weather? Not that bad, Nora. It's, gosh, goodness sake, that's mighty cold. Philip says 19 here in Massachusetts. Whew, y'all can have it. That is one thing I absolutely do not miss from living in the Northeast, no matter what I thought of the work that up there. Also, I'm pleased to say that it's not nearly, Holly says, okay, now it is 52 degrees and under partly cloudy skies here in Las Vegas. Rather a nice day. It's slowly getting warmer than it had been, but I am always cold. So later in the year, when it gets closer to like April, May, I'm not going to be wearing long sleeve shirts. You will see me be much more comfortable than I normally am. Also, before we dive into the stream, let me know, just take a look at the stream and let me know if it looks like the video is moving kind of oddly. It seems to me like it's over on YouTube. Let me know if it looks a little strange. I think I know what I can do to clean up the stream if that is the case. Also, hello to those. Thank you for joining the stream. I think, okay, so it does look choppy. All right, it does. It's not just me. Let me see if I think I can clean this up just a little bit by turning off one additional program. This should smooth it out. Yep. Yeah, yes, looks like a slideshow. Yeah, a little bit here. This should smooth it out. I've switched to a different kind of backdrop, and it was full motion. And I think that was just slowing down my computer a little bit because every computer's got a limit. So hopefully this is a little bit closer to my limit. And it shouldn't be. Now it should be a lot smoother. This should be much. There we go. That's better. All right. That's what it is. Shame on you. You let me down. Technology. All these computers. Anyway, let's get on with the day. Plenty of things I would like to talk to you about today. I hope your day is going well. I hope that you are staying as warm as you can. It is, as I said, not so bad here, but it's going to be busy very shortly, and it's going to be busy for a little while. We are getting ready for the Super Bowl, obviously here in Las Vegas. But before the Super Bowl is an even bigger contest, which is the Nevada primaries. Those are coming up in early February before the Super Bowl, basically the week before the Super Bowl. But before that will be the New Hampshire primaries, which are coming up on Tuesday. We just had the Iowa caucuses a few days ago. The results were kind of what we expected, and I want to give you a bit of a breakdown of those now. There's not a ton to say. I'm just going to preface this, I think that a lot of the political conversations we have are very overblown about things that are really not that huge of a deal. The Iowa caucuses matter because they're the beginning of the presidential election season forthrightly. They're the actual beginning of the voting, so that's useful. Beyond that, I wouldn't get too hung up on them because Iowa looks like Iowa and a few other places. Iowa is useful for understanding possibly South Carolina, because demographically, Iowa and South Carolina have a lot in common. They don't have much in common with New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a very different state. And I'll get to that in just a second. But first, let me show you how the Iowa caucuses turned out. These are the results from Iowa's Republican Party. Caucuses are a party affair as opposed to the general election, which is managed by states and counties and elections officials. So election officials oversee this for sure, but this is also kind of the party's own process. We'll get more into that as the weeks go on, including here in the state of Nevada. But this is how the Iowa caucuses turned out. Unexpectedly, don't let this name Ryan Binkley at the top of the screen startle you. That's not the guy that all of these red county markers are referring to. These are all referring to Donald Trump, of course, who ended up with 51% of the vote. People who watch the caucuses will tell you, oh, the Iowa caucuses don't necessarily predict the results, which is true. Candidates have done well in the Iowa caucuses, like Rick Santorum in 2016, but obviously he did not become the nominee in 2016. Donald Trump did. So it doesn't always indicate directly who the party's nominee is going to be. Having said that, usually it also doesn't include a former president. So this is different, right? These results kind of have to be viewed on their own and not with as much historical context as we normally would have them. As you can see, Donald Trump won almost every county in Iowa. He did very well in Polk County, which is Des Moines, the largest city in the state of Iowa. Did very well, as you can see, strongly over Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. They were very, very close. Vivek Ramaswamy statewide only got not quite 8% of the vote across the state of Iowa, and soon after the results came out, he dropped out of the race because he considered his candidacy no longer viable. Presumably, there was no path forward beyond that, and threw his full endorsement behind Donald Trump. Also out of the race now is Asa Hutchinson, who you can see got 191 votes total across the state of Iowa out of 110,000 that were cast. So he got 0.1% of the vote. He finally got out of the race just today. And Chris Christie had already dropped out of the race. He got 35 votes anyway across the state of Iowa. He had dropped out of the race before the Iowa caucuses happened. The one county that was different was this one, Johnson County. Johnson County is the home of the University of Iowa. So it is a uniquely progressive pocket within the state of Iowa, and tends to be one of the most college-educated parts of the state of Iowa. And so that apparently led to Nikki Haley being able to win that state. But if you look at the numbers, it couldn't have been any closer, literally. Nikki Haley, 1,271 votes. Donald Trump, 1,270. So she literally won Johnson County by 1 vote. That is not a mandate. And that's part of what they're going to have to deal with going into New Hampshire. I mean, one person happened to make that one county on the map go for Nikki Haley. But, you know, a win is a win. So they'll put it in the win column, I suppose. But this is basically the way it went throughout the state of Iowa. And in that regard, the Iowa caucuses did precisely what we expected them to. So much so that a lot of news organizations called the race real early, like when the Iowa caucuses began that evening, and then they kind of moved on with their day. Like, we're done. We know that Donald Trump has got this. That prompted a critical statement from Iowa's GOP, which oversees the caucuses. They did not like that a lot of news organizations called the race when only a few hundred votes had been cast. One of the other things to bear in mind, just as we watch this and as you look at caucuses versus primaries, if you're not the most versed in all of this, don't feel bad. Like it gets very complicated very quickly. But a caucus is different than a primary. They're not the same thing. Primaries are much more like what you think of in terms of a regular vote. You go to a voting place, you sign in, you get your ballot, you fill it out or push the button or pull the lever or whatever you have to do, and then you tell them you're done, they give you a sticker, and you leave. A caucus is different. A caucus is kind of like a local party meeting where you can do a couple of things, including pick a candidate and also pick delegates who are going to represent the party in an official capacity and sort of represent the votes of the party members. So a caucus is different. It's like a bunch of meetings happening all over the state at the same time, and the results of those meetings are where we get a candidate from. So the Iowa GOP, as they said in the statement, was upset that when, as they put it, just around 300 votes had been cast. And remember, there were 110,000 that got cast, and caucuses can take time. There were at least some places who, for example, ran out of ballot forms and had to use like an 8.5 by 11 legal pad and just tear pieces of paper off a legal pad and they give you something to vote on. But that was when they had called the race, when it was very, very early in the actual voting process. And so they were not happy about that. Part of the statement from the Iowa GOP reads, quote, One of the key differences between the Iowa caucus and a standard primary election is that Iowans have the chance to listen to presidential candidates or their surrogates and deliberate to make an informed decision. There was no need to rush one of the most transparent, grassroots democratic processes in the country, unquote. This is one of the things that makes the Iowa caucuses so unique and also highly controversial because it's not a secret ballot. In some circumstances in the past, you would have where if you didn't quite have enough people to get the delegates for that location, you could keep debating it and discussing it until people kind of coalesced around a candidate enough to give them the delegates. So it's not a secret ballot. And whether you like that or not is one thing. But the Iowa GOP says, this is our process. You disrespected the process, and we should have been able to move forward without having the media call the race. So why did they? Well, the Associated Press, which tends to be one of the first to make these calls, explained why they called the race for Donald Trump the way that they did. And basically it's because they have statistical models that were able to say, oh yeah, there's no mathematical way that this is going to go in any other way. Here's how AP put it. And the article I'm looking at is from the PBS NewsHour, but they take AP stories. So basically what AP says is in a traditional primary, which is normal for every news organization, AP does not declare a winner before the last polls close. That's why all the networks do their, projections, exit polls when the polls are closed, because that's standard practice. They don't want to influence people who may be still on their way to vote in a secret process. A caucus is not a secret process. Sometimes you can declare a winner right away. And this time AP's using the new system called VoteCast, which changes kind of the statistical model and gives them a little more deep information. But read the AP write-up. Why did they call it early? There are no polls and no fixed time when all the voting ends. Instead, there's an 8 p.m. Eastern deadline for caucus voters to arrive at their location, at which point deliberations among caucus goers begin behind closed doors. Some caucus sites might complete their business in a few minutes, while others can take some time to determine the outcome. So what AP did, they reviewed returns from caucus sites, their own polling, and made a determination that after they saw those early results, there was kind of no way, mathematically, that Donald Trump wasn't going to prevail. So I understand why the Iowa GOP was upset, but it would be fanciful to think that any other outcome was going to happen based on what we know about the state of Iowa. Do Iowans deserve to have their ballot their way? Of course. But they're also dealing with the system that their party created for them. So the party has created a system that's already not really a secret ballot in the way that you might think of like a go in the booth, close the curtain, and then you scribble your ballot, and then you bring it back out. It's already not that process. So this was also part of why the Democratic Party decided, rightly or wrongly, we'll see how it goes, but decided not to make New Hampshire and Iowa the first in the nation primaries because just the nature of the processes don't really reflect the mainstream of the country or the complexion of the country today. Literally, Iowa is vastly whiter than the rest of the country. So to start in Iowa on Martin Luther King weekend, by the way, which was an interesting choice, sends a signal too. And that was something that the Democratic Party kind of wanted to get away from. New Hampshire's not happy about that, but we'll get to that in a second. So that was the drama behind the process. So what do we learn from Iowa? Personally, I didn't learn that much. I don't think we learned a ton. I think if you just look at the overall results and go back to the Iowa GOP's map, we kind of got reaffirmed what we knew in the first place. I mean, look at how the candidate breakdown went. Donald Trump had more than half the vote, just over half the vote. Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley were neck and neck. Ron DeSantis got more than 23,000 votes. Nikki Haley got about 21,000 votes. They were 2 percentage points apart. They're not that far apart. And even combined, they didn't have as much support as Donald Trump. So it's not like, oh, Donald Trump's got a plurality of the vote, but DeSantis and Haley together have enough votes to make it look like there's a contest. There isn't at this point. Combined, they had about 40% of the vote. Donald Trump had 51%. That's a win. That's a solid win. So in that regard, there was nothing to learn. And I honestly, I was thinking about doing a show on the night of the Iowa caucuses. And the more I thought about it, I thought, what the hell are we going to talk about? There's not much to say. And there isn't going to be much to say. Because this is what I expected. I expected it to look just like the mainstream of the Republican Party's core. I think the place where the Iowa caucuses were useful is in defining that core officially, giving us an actual working look at what the Republican Party looks like among its core voters. Partly because, as some of you have alluded to with today's weather, it was so damn cold that a very small number of people, far fewer than in previous years, went to the polls. That's one of the things that Amy Walter talked about in Cook Political Report with her Iowa caucus takeaways. She kind of did one round of takeaways and then went home, got some sleep, and came back and did another round of Iowa caucus takeaways. One of the things that she brought up was that turnout was way down. They were expecting turnout around 200,000 voters, about 7% higher than 2016, which set a record for caucus goers. It was around 100,000. It was 110,000 votes. So there were far fewer people voting. And weather was a huge factor, including in Polk County, which is where Des Moines is. But that wasn't going to be, I think the people who showed up were the ones who were able to show up. And then the ones who we would consider the core of the Republican Party today. To that point, Amy Walter writes that Donald Trump improved among core GOP voters. She writes, and I'm quoting from Amy Walter in the Cook Political Report, in 2016, for example, entrance polls, meaning polls of people walking into the caucus sites, not as they've left, entrance polls found Trump winning just 28% of non-college educated Iowans. That was in 2016. But this time, he carried those voters with a whopping 62%. Among evangelicals, Trump improved his performance by 31 points. Among Republicans who are consistent caucus goers, Trump improved by 34 points. But Trump made up less ground among the state's more moderate, non-evangelical, and college-educated voters. For example, Trump improved his performance with college-educated voters, and again, this is just in Iowa. Trump improved his performance with college-educated voters by a more modest 14 points and by 10 points among moderates, unquote. So what does that mean? Trump improved all the way around. The idea at this point that there's anyone who actually lays a claim to the heart of the Republican Party other than Donald Trump is questionable at best. I'm not sure I buy that claim. I'm not sure I believe that in the least, that there's anyone else who kind of speaks for the party, at least the core of the party. We know the core of the party is more conservative, more evangelical, less college educated. So among these voters, insofar as Iowa looks anything like the Republican Party, yeah, he's kind of got it, right? He's kind of got it. And if you look at the demographic increases in terms of how he did, I don't know where that goes. I just don't. I don't see it's not that I don't see a path forward for the other candidates, but it's kind of skinny. The path is super duper skinny. To go back to Amy's analysis, another point that she makes is that Ron DeSantis, for what it was worth, tried to in some ways out-Trump Trump, and it didn't work. Here's how she puts it. On paper, his campaign, meaning Ron DeSantis' campaign, was tailor-made for a state like Iowa. In May 2023, according to the Real Clear Politics polling average, DeSantis trailed Trump by just 12 points. But 8 months and tens of millions of dollars later, DeSantis ended up losing to Trump by 30 points and taking just 21% of the vote. DeSantis attacked Trump from the right, arguing that Trump's tenure as president was a disappointment to conservatives who wanted to see a more muscular pushback against so-called woke culture. But in Iowa, caucus entrance polls found Trump won overwhelmingly among very conservative voters and evangelical voters. If DeSantis' pitch fell flat in Iowa, where he had the institutional support of the state's popular GOP governor, as well as the leader of the evangelical community, it's hard to see him getting traction in another contest, unquote. Pause right there. So, yeah, that didn't work. Although I do note the pivot and give both him and Nikki Haley some strategic credit for deciding not to attack Donald Trump directly. I don't see how that would have worked. I think that's kind of why Chris Christie didn't make it, is because he couldn't, as I've said on the show before, he couldn't figure out a strategic way to say what he was thinking, but not say it like Chris Christie and be quite so bullish about it. Like, Republicans don't like being, people don't like being told. People don't like being told they've made bad decisions. And they don't like being told that they have made un-American decisions. Whether that's what you believe they've done, no one wants to hear that. And I think that part of why Chris Christie failed to make more traction is because he came out as the kind of guy who was like, I'm going to tell it right, wrong, good, bad, if you like it, if you don't like it, that's what, straight talk Chris Christie. That doesn't work right now when the Republican Party is thoroughly in Donald Trump's thrall. And I think that's why DeSantis and Haley did as well as they did in Iowa. Not that they did great, but that's how they did as well as even their limited success there that they had, because they did not go after Donald Trump. The problem is, if you want Donald Trump and you want to go after him and say it's time for an alternative, and I think this is what a lot of people did not understand going into this. I'm trying to think of a good analogy, like, if you want to buy a Hummer, those gigantic trucks, and Hummers were not in production or they were all sold out, you might buy a Ford F-350 or the highest model of a Chevy Silverado just to kind of get a similar feel. If you couldn't buy a Tesla and you really wanted a Tesla, you could buy some other kind of electric car just to kind of get a similar feel for that. Other companies make electric cars. But if there's a Tesla and you want a Tesla, you go get a Tesla, right? If you want a Hummer and they sell Hummers, you go get one. If you are a pro-Trump Republican and Donald Trump is available, why would you vote for anyone else? You've got the candidate you wanted. So I think the someone other than Trump argument makes sense when he's not running or when he's not available. But he is running. He is available to Republican voters. And so Republican voters were like, oh, the guy I already know and I already like. Thanks, more of that, please. And that was kind of the way that it went. I think the fact that Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley were able to siphon off some votes is significant, because I think there were some people who were actually moved, not in terms of like being emotionally moved, but who connected with the argument that Donald Trump comes with a lot of baggage, that he is, as Nikki Haley put it, in his feelings a lot. And he is. Just today, he is in court right now in New York dealing with the defamation case brought by E. Jean Carroll. You may remember she claimed that he raped and sexually assaulted her years ago. He said a number of very, she says, defamatory things about her with regard to her allegation. A jury found that he did indeed sexually assault her, did not find that he raped her, but that he did behave in a sexually inappropriate manner towards her. And now this trial is to determine whether damages are due, and if so, how much. He's in court right now and may have to pay this woman a lot of money. There is still the case in New York about the Trump Organization. That could cost a lot of money. And so if there are other issues that prevent him from being the nominee, that's one thing. But even with all of that, you still have the candidate you asked for. You still have the guy. So why would I want somebody else? I think DeSantis and Haley made a somewhat cogent argument saying drama follows this guy. And today kind of proves that. I think some Republican voters are spoiling for the drama. That's why they picked him in the first place. The whole idea of taking a wrecking ball to the United States government, presumably to build something better, although he hasn't really said what, so I doubt that he would be able to do it. But to take a wrecking ball to the things that they dislike is still very viable and it's still very palatable. So I don't know how they're going to prevail over that kind of argument unless they are able to get beyond the wrecking ball argument. This idea that it's just time to start smashing things. Is it a successful argument? Is it helpful? Yeah, I don't think it's helpful, but it could be successful. It worked in 2016. It didn't work in 2020 because I think the country was like, okay, enough. I'm kind of sick of this. But because of the issues with Joe Biden's presidency, not that he hasn't gotten anything done, he's gotten a lot done, but just in terms of him as a person, him. I'm not sure that Biden supporters have the affinity for him that Trump supporters have affinity for Donald Trump. Or more to the point, that Biden supporters like Joe Biden more than they dislike Donald Trump. That might not be enough. I don't think it will be enough by itself. And it might take a whole lot more to get beyond that when it comes to the general election. But we'll see. Let me get to a few of your comments on YouTube. Again, thank you to those of you who are watching on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. Feel free to put your questions and thoughts in the chat. Keep it civil, obviously. Keep it smart and brief and pithy if you can, but I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to share your questions, your thoughts, your ideas. There's a wonderful group on YouTube that is fantastic to talk to, and I would love to hear from you as well. Holly asked, is Iowa a microcosm of uneducated and unmelanated Americans? Unmelanated, I kind of like that term. That's a very polite way of saying white people. Yes, Iowa is a very white state. Not sure I'd call it uneducated. I think they are differently educated for sure, but agriculture is when, excuse me, when people look at agriculture, right, farmers, I think it's very easy to think of like backwards kind of Dust Bowl subsistence farmers, but a farm is a business. And a lot of the questions that were asked during the town halls and debates in Iowa were business questions. They were about trade regulations. They were about workforce education. They were about labor rules. They were about automation. They were about international trade in goods and services, import-export rules. These people are asking very sophisticated questions about the business of agriculture. That's not uneducated. It may not be college educated in the same way. So it may not have that kind of worldly wise perspective in terms of comparative political philosophies, but it's not uneducated per se. I understood what you meant. Like you meant college education. Like I get that. And I also think that one of the things we have to be careful about, not per your question, but just in general, is looking at people who don't have a college education as being dumb or gullible. You all know what I think, that gullible ain't sexy, baby. But I don't think that uneducated means unintelligent. My grandmother did not have a college education. She was one of the smartest people we knew. She's still smarter than us. I think that we have to be careful how we talk about people in this way, especially because it can make them not want to hear from others. That implication of, oh, you're not college educated. Like, what's going on in your brain if you're not college educated? That gets real sticky real quickly. And that can just deepen the divide that prevents people from being able to hear one another. So I try to be very thoughtful with the way I use that term and not use it in ways that aren't really surgical, that aren't really precise. But I understand your question. I think that Iowa is a microcosm of some parts of America, like South Carolina. Iowa bears very strong resemblances to South Carolina, demographically, politically for sure. And that might not look good for Nikki Haley, because Nikki Haley was the governor of South Carolina. She was the governor who took the Confederate flag down from the State House after the shooting at Mother Emanuel AME Church. She's also the former governor who has had some challenging comments about race and slavery in the last few weeks. So we'll see how that goes. But even South Carolina's Republican leaders are endorsing Donald Trump. They're not in her column right now. So I don't know how that's going to go. And I think in that regard, Iowa could be useful. But got to be careful with that. Nora on YouTube writes, I think there are some folks supporting Trump just because they want to make a point about the Russia hoax, impeachments, etc., being used to derail the duly elected president. You know what? I think that's a valid argument. I think it's a valid concern. One of the things that I don't believe that the Democratic Party did a very good job of was bringing conservatives, Republicans, and right-leaning independents along with them and paying more attention to their points of view. I saw this a lot when I was hosting 1A and just kind of hearing the political discourse across the country. That feeling of now you have to listen to us was palpable. The idea that Donald Trump is a candidate who can do right by the American people is not as important to his core supporters, I believe, as the idea that Donald Trump is a candidate who can make America listen to us. These are people who feel disaffected, disenfranchised, disregarded. And so when they say things like Russia hoax, impeachment, all of these, the administrative state, drain the swamp, and the rest of the country goes, whatever, that doesn't go away. That feeling of dismissal doesn't go away. And I think that Donald Trump has been able to kind of coalesce that feeling of disenfranchisement and being ignored and saying, I hear you, and if you vote for me, they'll all hear you soon. So I don't know that policy is really the point. I think maybe just validation in some ways of them being able to see to themselves and say to the rest of the country, see, we are powerful. We do have power. We do have clout. We do still matter. We're here, and now you have to deal with us. I don't think Donald Trump would have a candidacy at all if left and right were able to talk, if Democrats and Republicans were able to talk, if progressives and conservatives were able to talk. Donald Trump, I think, is an outgrowth of the inability of the American people to close our own political divides. And so he is what has crawled out of the divide itself. Not because he is such a brilliant political thinker. He's not. He's playing on things that are very base emotions. And I don't even know that he knows what he's doing. Who knows? But because we could not close the tectonic plates of our civil disagreements, that gap allowed for someone like Donald Trump to emerge and to make the most of that gap by pushing it further open. That's why he's successful. So to your point, Nora, I think there are some folks supporting him just because they want to make a point. I think that's a very cogent argument, and it's well said. Whether or not Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, Joe Biden can make anything of that, we'll see. I don't know that they can, because if you are demanding acknowledgement, the only thing that's going to work for you is getting that acknowledgement. That's what's going to make you feel better. All that other stuff is just kind of window dressing. But who knows? I'm going to pause in just a second, but first I want to just talk New Hampshire in just very broad strokes. A few things to note, by the way, just kind of in the last few hours, that one of the super PACs that supports Ron DeSantis has begun laying off some staff, the Never Back Down super PAC. So that might be a sign that they're starting to get nervous about what's going on. That's according to the New York Times, that they've begun to lay off some staff. And Ron DeSantis is moving more of his campaign focus to South Carolina, which goes to the polls in a couple of weeks. According to the New York Times, DeSantis is going to leave New Hampshire after his events today, and then he's going to make his way to South Carolina. I'd be interested to see if Nikki Haley does as well. We'll see. The other thing to note is that the debates that were supposed to happen in New Hampshire this week have both been canceled. CNN was supposed to do one on Sunday, and ABC News was supposed to do one, I believe, tomorrow, on Thursday, but there weren't enough candidates to take part. Ron DeSantis said that he was willing to do one, but he was the only one who accepted. So that's going to be a town hall instead. Nikki Haley's going to have a town hall instead, and Ron DeSantis had agreed to a debate, but that is not going to happen because there aren't any other candidates. Nikki Haley has said she doesn't want to do any debates unless Donald Trump is there, and Donald Trump's never going to be there, so that's out. And without the stars aligning and the logistics working out, they canceled them both. So this is beginning to kind of narrow itself rather significantly. I think at this point it's going to be a very fast-moving campaign season. I don't know that it's going to take very long. I'm not even sure we'll make it to Super Tuesday with more than 3 candidates, with more than 2 candidates. But New Hampshire's going to tell the tale. I think New Hampshire is really going to tell the tale in terms of who can make it, who can't make it, and whether or not the primaries are going to be worth watching at all. It is entirely possible. Think about it. It's entirely possible that the 2024 primaries would mean absolutely nothing. Donald Trump had such a strong showing in Iowa. Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley are crossing their fingers that either New Hampshire or South Carolina could give them some signs of life. If they don't, this could all be over by Super Tuesday at best, by March. Joe Biden has the Democratic Party's complete support. Dean Phillips has not really been able to gain enough traction to make a strong enough counter showing. And so if that doesn't go anywhere, then it's Joe Biden. We could be Trump Biden by March, and none of the primaries could matter. What a wild year that would be. And what would that mean for like voter sentiment and how people feel about the election? And who knows? It could be a weird year. Just settle in. The year already seems weird. You may not have ain't seen nothing yet. And yes, that is a grammatical sentence, because I said so. You can look it up. I want to talk about New Hampshire in just a minute. We will get into that in just a second. After we talk New Hampshire, I want to move on to an update in the whole saga over Harvard and MIT and Ivy League institutions. Bill Ackman, the guy who pushed so hard for what he would consider reforms at Harvard, gave an interview to CNBC to one of my former colleagues, Andrew Ross Sorkin. The interview was interesting because it revealed a lot more about why Bill Ackman is doing all of this, why he is on this crusade to change the way that higher education works. I watched the interview and another one he gave recently. It's really revealing in terms of who he is and why he is the way he is. I want to show you some of that, and also one part of the interview where he double talked Andrew Ross Sorkin, and I don't think Andrew caught it, but he did indeed. We will get to that, talk a little bit about New Hampshire, get to some of your questions and thoughts in the chat as we try to stay warm on this cold, cold day. Next. This is The Nightlight. I'm Joshua Johnson. Good to have you with me today. I appreciate you being here. Please remember to go to the Linktree site, linktree.com/nightlightjoshua. Follow me on YouTube at Nightlight Joshua. You can also on the Linktree site, excuse me, put a few dollars in the tip jar if you are enjoying the program. You can follow me on Substack for more of my original essays and articles, or you can get some of our new merch, which is slowly starting to come in. I know that some of you have gotten your t-shirt. Philip, I see you said your t-shirt arrived. Yay! Please tell me what you think of it. Let me know if you love it. If there's any changes that you would make, if there's anything wrong with it, just let me know. I would certainly love to know how we can improve the merch. There is also the Gullible Ain't Sexy t-shirt. My families have finally arrived, and I saw it on an actual human body, which is so weird. It's so surreal to create something, and then you put it online, and then someone buys it, and then it's a thing, and it's real, and it's like, wow. So it's exciting. It's really kind of fun to be able to put this together, and that helps to keep the show on the air. One of the things that I've really tried to do as much as possible is to keep the economics behind the show very squarely within our community so that the people who really love the show are the ones to whom I am answering. It's part of the beauty of being directly supported by your listeners and viewers and readers, as opposed to by advertisers. And advertising will factor in eventually, potentially, but I would much rather work for you. And I think this allows me to work for you much more directly than trying to just build an audience and cross my fingers and hope that advertisers show up. That can get really weird really quickly. So please check out the merch. Please check out the Linktree site that has all the different ways to follow me. You can also contact me through that site anytime, and I will get back to you as quickly as I can. But I'm really glad to see that those of you who are watching enjoy the program and the work and the things that we do, to the point that you're willing to buy merch. Oh my goodness. And my merch is on the way. So I'm looking forward to that. I think sometimes delivery can take a little while. So if you're waiting on it, please, it's coming. It is on the way. But yeah, merch. Thanks to those of you who have purchased it. Let me close the loop very briefly on New Hampshire, and then I want to move on to other things, and we'll talk about Bill Ackman. We'll get more into that. Also, later in the program, I get a little, this is my peeve because I'm a journalist. I'm one of those people who works for them, or worked for them, I guess, the big corporate them. I get a little peeved when I hear people say, oh, the government's hiding everything from you, and you never really know what they're doing, and there's no way to really look in, and it's just a black box, and, you guys, tell us just what you want us to hear, and everything else goes unsaid. I get a little annoyed at that, partly because it's not true. There is a tremendous amount of information that you can know about what goes on in your government, and also because we in the press have not done a good enough job of showing you how to do that for yourselves. I think part of our relationship with the country that is unhealthy is our desire to make the public rely on us for their information. A healthier relationship would be, we will show you how we got our information. And then the point where our reporting takes over, where we got it ourselves because we did the legwork, that can connect with what you can do for yourself. It's the whole give a man a fish, teach a man to fish dichotomy, where if we're covering Congress, you should know how to look up a bill yourself. And you should know that we have chased members of Congress down the halls, down the corridors where you can't be right now. That's how we rebuild trust. I do my piece, but you're never fully dependent on me. Everything you're able to do, I show you how to do it so that you can do it as well as I can. I replicate my knowledge in you. That's how you build trust. That's how we restore the connection between the press and the public. We elevate the public so that we are all seeing the same things at the same time, and you are able to do your own legwork, just like we can do it. And then where your legwork stops, that's where our reporting takes over. That's the way forward. By working together and not by just finding new ways to make you depend on us. That day is over. We need a new day, urgently. Soapbox over. Let me get back to New Hampshire and show you a little bit of what to look for in New Hampshire. I won't get too deep into it, but I would just reiterate that one of the reasons why I didn't want to pay too much attention to Iowa all at once is because Iowa demographically is very different from New Hampshire. New Hampshire tends to have a higher number of college-educated residents. It's more moderate. You are going to have a variety of people who show up. You don't have to be a dyed-in-the-wool Republican. You could be an independent who registers to take part in the New Hampshire primary. So it's a different kind of a primary process, and it's a primary compared to a caucus than Iowa. So you have two very different kinds of votes that don't really overlap with one another. And so I wouldn't try to make too much meaning from what you see just in Iowa compared to everything else. South Carolina, again, that will be useful, but I wouldn't get too deep into Iowa. But what should we be talking about with New Hampshire? Well, New Hampshire Public Radio had a good piece about how poll workers are getting ready for primary day. Obviously, getting their Sharpies ready and the I voted stickers and so on. But they're expecting a heavier workload this year due to partly, and this is one of the things to note, we talk so much about the Republican primary process. Here's the thing, though. Joe Biden is not on the New Hampshire primary ballot at all. Reason being, he didn't put his name in. He just didn't bother. He did not campaign there. He didn't put in a lot of effort there, didn't really build an infrastructure there. And so his name is just, it's not on the ballot. They're also dealing with a new voter ID law for first-time registrants. Some towns have some new voting systems, so there are some changes. It's going to still be busy there on January 23rd when they go to the polls. They're also preparing for a new affidavit ballot law that's taken effect. Voters who register at the polls for the first time, and this is from New Hampshire Public Radio, voters who register at the polls for the first time without valid identification will use special marked ballots. This is the first time they're doing this in New Hampshire. If they don't return proof of eligibility to the Secretary of State's office, that's the New Hampshire Secretary of State, not Antony Blinken in Washington. If they don't return proof of eligibility to the Secretary of State's office within 7 days, their votes could be removed from the final tally. Moderators told New Hampshire Public Radio they've been given detailed guidance by the state on how to process any affidavit ballots. The state has also issued guidance on interpreting messy handwriting or misspellings for voters who choose to write in Biden. If you can't spell Biden, why are you voting? We won't have that conversation. Anyway, so affidavit ballots. This is not unusual. Lots of states do this kind of balloting. Lots of states, and I'm surprised that New Hampshire didn't have this process before. Maybe they just updated it. Lots of states have a process for people to be able to vote, even if the voter rolls don't look quite right. Lots of states have this process. So I would not look at this as like, oh, potential sign of trouble. Could it be? Yes, but logistical, not necessarily like a plot against the vote. But they also have this write-in thing where there is a write-in campaign that has been kind of grassroots from some Granite State voters. This is a piece from WGBH Boston about how some Democrats in New Hampshire are still planning to vote. And they're still planning to go to the polls, even though Joe Biden's name is not on the ballot, because they are going to write in his name. Reason being, they don't like the fact that New Hampshire is not the first in the state primary, and they don't like the fact that New Hampshire's been kind of disregarded, but they still want to show support for the Biden campaign anyway, and they still want to have that effort to be part of the vote regardless. So they're going to show up anyway. I mean, Biden is skipping the New Hampshire primary. Let's just be clear. He hasn't bothered, but New Hampshire still exists, and folks in, Dixville Notch, New Hampshire are still going to vote. They may not be the first in the nation, but they're going to vote anyway. And so they're going to go for it. Remember, South Carolina was the state that put Joe Biden over the top when he was running for the nomination. And South Carolina demographically much more reflects the Democratic Party of today, particularly because it is much more diverse. It is a vastly more diverse state. It is much more of a black state, black and brown state, but increasingly black and brown, but historically, obviously, much more of a black state. And that was a state where Joe Biden kind of became the nominee. So the party has moved South Carolina to the front of the official list. They're voting first, but New Hampshire's still doing their thing anyway. And GBH noted that there are still people in New Hampshire who want to have a strong showing, want there to be a vote total of any kind to show, to kind of demonstrate that there are Democrats who are actually, literally, tangibly in support of Joe Biden. One of the things that GBH notes is that there is a political action committee that's trying to get people to write in Joe Biden's name, that's spending money on commercials airing in New Hampshire, showing people how to do a write-in vote. You start at the bottom, you bubble in the little oval, and then you can write the name, write it nice and legibly. So that show of support is still happening. I think part of the reason that matters is because when you look at Democratic Party politics for the last year and a half, I would say last year at least, no one is really bouncing off the walls over the prospect of reelecting Joe Biden. His age is the issue. His age is the issue. It's not his legislative accomplishments. It's not his political prudence. It's not his deep, deep connections to domestic and world leaders. I mean, few people on the planet in American politics are as thoroughly connected to world leaders as Joe Biden is and has been for a long time. He's a very well-connected person, whether you like the way he does his business or not, whether you like his leadership or not. It's a thing. Like, people feel very strongly in the world community about Joe Biden because he's built those relationships. But he's old. He's a very old man. If he wins and makes it through another term, he would be like 86 by the time his term is over. Is that the look that America wants? I think the other issue is also Vice President Kamala Harris, who had a really rough start to her vice presidency, but has come a very long way since her term began. I think at first she just kind of did not exactly know which way was up in terms of how to be a vice president. She has gotten much better at that over time. I think lately she's acquitted herself quite well. She was just on The View yet today, I think, talking about the Biden administration's policies. And I think she's kind of settled into Washington in a much more effective way, not so much in terms of becoming like a creature of the swamp, but more in terms of just being at ease being there and knowing how to let the career DC professionals guide her through her work. But I think if people felt more strongly or more positively, perhaps, about Kamala Harris, they might not feel so weird about Joe Biden running again, because they might feel a little better about, okay, well, if something happens to him, at least Kamala's going to step in. That's what I'm not seeing enough polling on. I would like to see more polling on how Democrats feel about Kamala Harris, not just about Joe Biden, because that's what's in the back of everyone's mind, right? If something happens to this sweet old man, who's going to be president? It's going to be her. What do we think of her? And I don't think we have good enough surveillance of what Americans think of Kamala Harris, not just Joe Biden. Is the issue perhaps, and I'm making this up, I'm just spitballing here, if Democrats had a different running mate in 2024 for Joe Biden, then how would you feel about electing him? So that if something happened to Joe Biden, you'd still feel okay with him. I'm not saying that's what Democrats should do. I don't know what Democrats should do. But it makes me wonder, like, is that the issue? Is it just the what if question? What if he is incapacitated? What if he dies? What if he just retires? What if he's infirm, unable to perform his duties? If he is non-compos mentis, what then? Like, is that the issue? I would love to hear more in a very precise, unvarnished way about what happens to Joe Biden, and would a better vice president make you feel better about renominating him or reelecting him? No one wants to say it outright, but everyone's saying it very obliquely, and they need to just come out and say it. Just say it directly and then deal with that. I think that's partly why it feels a little shaky. I don't know. Christina, I see your comment on YouTube. Christina writes, I work in Keene, New Hampshire, and have coworkers that are going to vote for Biden. I'm not surprised. Yeah, I covered the New Hampshire primary very briefly on last time around, on a very snowy day in Manchester, New Hampshire. But yeah, I would not be surprised if people did head out to vote for Joe Biden in person. I see, Sarah, your comment on YouTube with regard to Kamala Harris. Sarah writes, that's what I hear from people around me. Dislike for the VP. I like her, but then I've never been afraid of strong women. That could be a factor. Although, I wonder how that plays with like a Nikki Haley as well. I'm not sure how Republicans feel about Nikki Haley being a strong woman getting the nomination, and then maybe just kind of the path that was blazed by the Shirley Chisholms and the Hillary Clintons and the people who, the Carly Fiorinas who went for it in the past, has kind of softened the possibility of a woman being the nominee. And then the Sarah Palins of the world, for whatever people thought of Sarah Palin, just the idea of seeing a woman in that role. And then also Nikki Haley having very cogent policies on the campaign trail. We'll see. I do kind of wonder if just the fact that Nikki Haley is a woman plays a factor. Don't know, but it may not matter at all because you've got Donald Trump in the race. So all of that could be entirely moot. One more aspect of New Hampshire that I wanted to touch on before I move on, and that is a campaign issue that has not actually been very busy or very big on the New Hampshire campaign trail, but has been in previous years, and it's not nearly as prominent now as it used to be, and that's the opioid crisis. New Hampshire has been hit pretty hard by this crisis, and the presidential candidates used to come and they used to talk about it very directly. Now, another piece from New Hampshire Public Radio that I see suggests that it's really not as prominent. One of the paragraphs in the piece contrasts this election to the 2016 election. It reads, in part, quote, in the 8 years since, more than 3,000 Granite Staters have died due to drug overdoses. To Gladstone, someone they quoted in the piece, and some others touched by the crisis, the political rhetoric in this year's Republican primary feels empty. I think they're just throwing stuff out there to try to appease people at this point, Gladstone said, and that's not what we need. We need somebody that really is taking it seriously and has sat down and thought about a plan. Unquote. It goes on to read, top Republican presidential candidates continue to link, let me back up one paragraph, sorry. The piece reads, federal immigration officials say the vast majority of drugs coming across the southern border are smuggled through legal ports of entry, mostly by U.S. citizens or other legal residents, not by migrants illegally crossing the border between entry points. Nonetheless, top Republican presidential candidates continue to link the drug crisis to immigration. In recent months, former President Donald Trump has claimed that drugs, criminals, gang members, and terrorists are pouring into our country because the border has been erased. He's also called for drug dealers to get the death penalty. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has proposed sending the military into Mexico to take out the cartels and pledged to shoot suspected drug smugglers, quote, stone cold dead right at that southern border, unquote. So that's where the debate sits right now. Actually, someone asked DeSantis about this in the town hall he did in Iowa, I think, where they asked him, how many innocent people are you willing to kill to stop migrant smugglers and stop the drug trade across the southern border? He didn't really answer that question, although I think that there is a way to answer that question politically, but he kind of juked around the real issue, kind of did a little dodge and kept it moving. But I understand the question. But the opioid crisis hasn't really been discussed very much on the campaign trail as such as a local issue in this way, except with the connection to China. China is the core reason why our opioid crisis is as bad as it is, because you have knockoff fentanyl that is coming from China through ports of entry, either U.S. ports of entry or ports of entry further south that are able to get into the country. China could do an enormous, to prevent the trade of fentanyl in the United States, and they won't. And the United States government has not been able to convince them, persuade them, cajole them, at least not yet, to do anything about it. So China is a huge factor. And the fact that that is how it's been talked about by Republican candidates is not invalid. There's a lot of validity to that. But it's not enough to deal with the issue in its totality. There's the domestic piece of it, right? Once it gets here, where's the market? It's not being brought entirely by drug mules from the border to Lincoln, Nebraska. There's other intermediaries, and it's those other intermediaries that present such an issue for communities like New Hampshire. That is why it's so difficult at times, because it's all that other stuff in the middle. And I think China is a much more blunt, you can hit China with a much more blunt object than you can in terms of dealing with your friends and neighbors who may be struggling with all of the myriad reasons people get into opioid addiction. That is much more difficult. I'm not sure that the political solutions are there for that right now. But that's definitely where I think the conversation needs to go. Let me stop talking about Iowa and New Hampshire now. It's one of those topics that just kind of, it really sort of expands to fill whatever space that you put into it, because there is so much to talk about. I do want to talk about Bill Ackman, but I also want to give you, I will sometimes tell you how things are going here in Las Vegas. And for those of you who don't know, I live in Las Vegas. It's a great place to live, by the way. There's a hell of a lot more to Las Vegas than the Strip. So much more than the Strip. But the Strip is changing because there is a new ordinance for those of you who visit that you should know about, that if you've never been to Las Vegas, the Strip is Las Vegas Boulevard, South Las Vegas Boulevard. The Strip runs basically from the Mandalay Bay, which is right parallel with the airport, north to the Strat, which used to be called the Stratosphere, the big tall tower, the building that's shaped with the observation tower at the top. That's the Strip. Instead of crossing the street in many areas of the Strip, there are a number of sky bridges, pedestrian bridges that go over the Strip, and that's how you get across. You can basically walk the entire Strip by going along one side or the other, and then you cross a sky bridge. So if you're trying to get from the MGM Grand to New York, there's a sky bridge that goes over at Tropicana. Or if you're trying to get from the Wynn to the fashion shops, there's a sky bridge that will take you over, and sometimes there are crosswalks. Well, there's a new law in Las Vegas that says that you have to keep it moving on these crosswalks, or you could risk jail time for slowing down the flow of traffic on these crosswalks. It's a somewhat controversial measure, but I understand why they're doing it. It's a new law, took effect just yesterday, just Tuesday, that bans standing and stopping on those pedestrian bridges, the ones where people will often take selfies and, watch street performers that gather there. You cannot do that anymore. Ordinance took effect yesterday. The maximum penalties are up to 6 months in jail or a $1,000 fine. So county commissioners, because the Strip is technically not in the city of Las Vegas, it is in Clark County, but it's technically carved out of the city of Las Vegas. They voted unanimously this month to approve the measure prohibits people from stopping, standing, or engaging in an activity that causes another person to stop on the pedestrian bridges. That includes up to 20 feet around the connected stairs, elevators, and escalators. Ban does not include standing or stopping if a person is waiting to use an elevator, stairway, or escalator. So the idea is to keep things moving. Opponents say that this violates their First Amendment rights. One executive from the ACLU of Nevada, Attar Hasibullah, said, quote, to the AP, quote, that might mean the right to protest. That might mean someone who's sharing expressions of their faith. That might mean a street performer, unquote. said those rights are protected at their highest level in public spaces. I'm not sure that I fully buy that. If you did want to protest, you could still apply for a permit to have a protest. I think if you prevented people from being there under any circumstances, that's another matter. And that might be in just the way that the enforcement goes. But the First Amendment is not absolute. There are lawful restrictions in the time, place, and manner that you're allowed to express yourself in different places and in different ways. I don't know. Holly, I see your question in the chat. Holly asked, does this apply to the water hawkers or are they the target? They're kind of the target. The people who sell bottles of water or who are dressed up like, the Incredibles, and then they want to charge you $50 for a picture. And yes, those people exist. You'll take a picture with them and then they'll say, $50 please. The people who are street performers, the people who hand out palm cards, I don't know if they still do it. Hang on, let me find a piece. So you'll hear this. You'll hear this sound up and down the strip. You'll hear this in some parts of the strip. Just someone flicking on a piece of paper. And then you look up and they go, and they put the piece of paper in your hand real quick. And you look at it and it's a palm card with a phone number and a picture of a very scantily clad woman. I think they've cleaned up a lot of these hawkers. They're not as prominent there anymore, but a very scantily clad woman and a phone number that would apparently allow you to do things. And it used to be all you hear is just paper and then they put it in your hand real quick. I think it's geared more toward them. And there's been a lot of effort to try to get a lot of that off of the Las Vegas Strip because it is annoying as hell. And also because on busy days, those bridges, they back up. And there's not a whole lot of room once you get to the bottom of the bridge before you are standing in traffic at the curb. So I totally understand the safety aspect of it. Don't know how it's going to be enforced, but they kind of do keep order on the Las Vegas Strip really quite well for the most part. There's not a whole lot of drama on the Strip. Most people who go there to have a good time do, and they stay out of trouble because why would you? But we'll see. I'm not sure exactly how that's going to go, but it's going to go. Let me take a quick break. When we come back, I do want to talk to you a bit about Bill Ackman, the billionaire investor who helped lead the push to unseat Claudine Gay as the president of Harvard University. She resigned and has returned to her work as a professor. Bill Ackman just gave an interview to CNBC recently where he talked more about himself, his background, his motivations, and why he's doing what he's doing. I want to lay some of that out for you in just a minute. After that, I want to give you a quick primer on how to follow Congress, how to keep an eye on Congress. We are moving toward another potential government shutdown. Yay. Yeah, it's been 45 minutes, so I guess we're due. But when these kinds of things happen and you wonder, what the hell are they doing? What is going on in Congress? What are they doing? And why isn't the media talking about it? Two things. One, they probably are. Two, you probably don't even need the media to figure it out. You can figure it out yourself if you know where to look. There is an enormous amount of really simple, useful information that you can use to keep track of your government for yourself. I'll show you how when we come back. Welcome back. Good to have you with me today. Let's talk about the continuing fallout from Harvard. It's a story that seems to keep growing, and it has grown in a very weird direction because it is no longer purely about the fight against anti-Semitism on college campuses. It began that way. And as you'll soon see, that fight against anti-Semitism was very much a core focus of this for a lot of reasons, not just Israel's attack by Hamas on October 7th, Israel being attacked. But there was more behind it as well. We've talked in this program about Claudine Gay, the now former president of Harvard University, the shortest tenured president in its history. There's a great piece now from the Harvard Crimson, which is Harvard's student newspaper, their excellent student newspaper, about how Claudine Gay's presidency unraveled and how quickly it spiraled away from her ability to do damage control. The piece begins like this. While Claudine Gay visited Rome for Christmas, controversy burned at Harvard over allegations of plagiarism in the embattled president's academic work. Gay escaped to Italy over the holiday week for a brief vacation with her husband and son before she hoped to reset her presidency after a disastrous first semester in office. But her time as Harvard's 30th president was over before she even got back to Cambridge. On December 27th, Harvard Corporation senior fellow Penny S. Pritzker, class of 81, called for a conversation that made clear Gay had lost the board's confidence to lead the university. Gay told Pritzker she would resign, according to a person with knowledge of her decision. Pritzker's phone call came after days of conversations among the corporation's 11 members, including multiple phone calls between board members and Gay as they questioned whether Gay could stay in her job. 6 days later, at 1:18 p.m. on January 2nd, Gay made it official in a university-wide email capitulating to a cascade of criticism that began in the days after her administration's awkward silence after the October 7th Hamas attack on Israel, escalated following her disastrous congressional testimony about anti-Semitism at Harvard, and ultimately came to a calamitous crescendo during the holidays over allegations of plagiarism in her academic work. Pause right there. First of all, that's what a paragraph looks like when Harvard students try to write the news. That's a lot. That needs to be 3 sentences that you need to send them to me. I'll edit. But you get the point. Basically, this snowballed really, really fast. And one of the people who packed more snow on that mountain was Bill Ackman, who is a billionaire investor, co-founder of a hedge fund called Pershing Square. He is, by his own description, an activist investor, and his job is to shake things up. I think one of the things I didn't really understand about this whole drama until I began to learn more about the players is why people do what they do. One of the most valuable courses I could recommend taking if you want to understand current events, if you want to understand the news, politics, even popular culture, but especially politics, is a drama class. Take a theater class. Theater, more than any other performing or fine art, in my view, is a great study in why people do the things they do. It's a great way to understand subtext, plot, what people say versus how people act. And I found that my theater education, and I have a theater degree, was one of the best bits of my Renaissance man upbringing that has turned out to be useful, not just in news, but in life. The things people say and the motivations people have and the actions they take and what they do when push comes to shove, all of that is part and parcel with politics. And if you want to understand that, I would recommend a theater class, a good course in theater. Now, I think a lot of people won't do that because they would like to believe that they understand people and they don't need anyone telling them what people think. Okay, fine. Then don't go through life feeling like the news is out of control and politics are capricious. Because if you did really understand, you wouldn't feel that way. You would feel like, okay, well, that's dumb, but I understand why he did it. Okay, well, that was crazy, but I guess it couldn't have gone any other way. It'll give a clarity to the world that I have only found through studying the arts. The arts make life make more sense. And no art, for my money, more than theater, makes life make more sense. Because of that, I have a different kind of a character study of Bill Ackman. And part of the way that that came about is because CNBC did an interview with Bill Ackman, a live interview on its premier program called Squawk Box, Andrew Ross Sorkin, who has been one of their longtime anchors, interviewed Bill Ackman at the offices of Pershing Square Capital, which is his hedge fund. Bill Ackman started it. He doesn't run it day to day anymore. It's run by other people, but it is still his company. One of the things that Andrew Ross Sorkin asked about, and I'm going to show you a few clips from this interview, is how this started. And I think once you hear the story of how this started, it'll put this in a very different context. Remember, this has exploded to include accusations of plagiarism that were leveled against Bill Ackman's wife, Neri Oxman, who was a tenured professor at MIT, and now he has gone after MIT and other institutions to basically go through the records of other academics and say, okay, well, let's see where else there's plagiarism and see what else needs to be done about this. It's kind of a distraction from dealing with the fact that Neri Oxman herself acknowledged Business Insider's reporting. Now, Bill Ackman has kind of taken this farther, and he is punching back. But why did he get into this fight? In the first place, it had to do with anti-Semitism and with Jewish students at Harvard feeling like and saying things are happening here that make us unwelcome. Listen to how Bill Ackman describes his reasons for getting involved in this whole matter in the first place. As he told Andrew Ross Sorkin, it all had to do with his dad.
It actually began before October, and it began in this room. This is our boardroom at Pershing Square. It also happens to be the place we host our Pershing Square Foundation board meetings, a board that my father was a member of. And literally every meeting, my dad would say, Bill, you're just not doing enough about anti-Semitism. I think it's a really important problem. You need to focus on it. And I was very dismissive of my dad. I love my father. He passed away in May.
You dismissed your dad when he said that?
I said, look, the Jews are doing great. I'm not experiencing, I don't see Jews experiencing a lot of anti-Semitism. And we focus on economic empowerment. We focus on enhancing people's ability to, one-acre farmers in Kenya, things like this. And then Dad had heart surgery coming up, and he was very concerned about it because it was kind of life or death. And he wrote me 3 letters. One was, here are my instructions. If I die, memorial service, etc. This is what I want you to do with your mom, financial estate planning. The third one was like a long letter about anti-Semitism. He said, look, Bill, I want my last words to you to be, this is something you need to focus on. And I didn't do anything, to be honest. And then October 7th happened. And it was really October 8th. And it was when 30-odd Harvard student organizations, my alma mater, came out and said, the morning after the most horrendous, barbaric terrorist acts in history, at least in modern history for sure, they came out and said, you know what, it's Israel's fault. Israel's solely responsible for these horrendous, heinous acts. And then that was the beginning of this journey.
So that's how it started for him. His father told him, you need to be much more active in fighting anti-Semitism. He dismissed it until the attack on October 7th. And then when he began to hear students at his alma mater say what they had been experiencing, then he got involved in a much more intense way. The tactic he's taken, so that's why he's involved in it. Why is he going after the university quite so directly? Well, if you want to understand that, you got to understand what an activist investor is. An activist investor basically says, hey, I own a piece of this company now. Maybe you should take my suggestion on how to make this company better, how to make it perform better, how to make it more profitable. If you buy enough of the company, enough shares in the company, you can get proportionally more control over what the company does. And sometimes activist investors succeed in making dramatic changes at a company that do indeed make it more valuable. Sometimes activist investors can destroy a company. It's all part of the challenge of building a company. But that's what Bill Ackman is. He is a very unabashed activist investor. One of the reasons that matters is because universities are also major investors. There's a piece in the Wall Street Journal today about how Harvard has been talking to a number of companies in Silicon Valley, venture capital firms that fund tech companies. So these are the companies where when Mark Zuckerberg wanted to start Facebook, or when Sam Altman wanted to expand OpenAI, they would go to any number of these investment firms who are based in Silicon Valley and say, hey, we've got a great idea, give us what X amount of money and we'll turn it into 100X. That's the range they're working in. It's not like, oh, I give you some money and I get a 10% profit. That is not how Silicon Valley works. Silicon Valley is I give you money and I get a 10,000% profit. That's the kind of scale that they work at. And those are the kind of investors that Harvard is trying to court for its endowment. And just today, the Wall Street Journal had a piece about how executives at Harvard Management Company have been meeting with some of Silicon Valley's investment firms, Sequoia Capital, Kleiner Perkins, Andreessen Horowitz. These are three of the big ones on Sand Hill Road in Palo Alto who are the money that make the Valley happen. They have funded some of the biggest tech companies. Apps that are on your phone right now, their money helped make those apps happen. Harvard Management Company is the largest college endowment in the country. And Harvard has been trying to get more invested in tech. By its own admission, it's not as invested in tech as some of the other university endowments that are comparable. And as a result, its returns haven't been as strong as they perhaps might have been. So Harvard is trying to do more business there. Guess what's getting in the way? This whole scandal over anti-Semitism on campus. That has been making it harder in some ways for Harvard to make these inroads, at least lately, because some of them are not happy with the way that Harvard has been dealing with Silicon Valley, with issues of anti-Semitism, and they just haven't kind of been able to meet eye to eye. So Bill Ackman's advocacy in that regard has tangible impacts, dollars and cents impacts on Harvard and its ability to pay for its own operations. The Harvard endowment funds about a third of everything at Harvard, mostly restricted dollars. It's not just like a big pot of money where they can just dig in and spend, but that's like a third of Harvard's money comes just from that endowment. So this is not an insignificant amount of money. Bill Ackman gave an interview to David Rubenstein, who is another billionaire investor. The David Rubenstein show on Bloomberg Television is basically, I'm David Rubenstein. I'm a rich white guy who knows a lot of other rich people, and I've got them on my phone, so I've decided to text some of them and put together a TV show. That's basically what the David Rubenstein show is. He's super well connected, and he just knows all these people, and he's a friendly face, and so they do the thing. It's kind of like a podcast for people who don't podcast. But anyway, David Rubenstein did an interview with Bill Ackman not too long ago, a few months ago before this, and talked to him more broadly about how he came up and what his background is. Bill Ackman was from Chappaqua, New York. His father was in business. He's always been involved in business, always been interested in being an entrepreneur and having his own wealth and his own operation so that he could do his own thing. And this is how he talked about being an activist investor. I think this will make him make a different level of sense once you understand his view toward acting on business. Here he is describing his previous hedge fund's investment in Wendy's, the fast food chain, and how he helped the corporation at Wendy's make a big decision that increased the company's value.
One of the early investments was Wendy's, the hamburger chain, and Wendy's owned 100% of a chain called Tim Hortons in Canada. And Tim Hortons was a very profitable, successful, pure franchise of coffee and donut chain, principally in Canada. And you could fairly clearly see that business was worth about $5 billion at least. It had about $450 million of operating income. It's probably worth meaningfully more than that. But you could buy all of Wendy's for $5 billion. So literally the market was ascribing zero value to the Wendy's franchise. And our advice to the CEO is, well, just spin off Tim Hortons and then focus on fixing Wendy's. And then we wrote a letter to the board. We attached the Blackstone valuation, which was nearly double where the stock was trading. And then 6 weeks later, magically, they spun off Tim Hortons.
Okay, so you did that with other companies, and being an activist, was it consistent with your personality to do this? Because you got to be a tough guy to call up CEOs and say, hey, look, I got a better idea about how to run your company than you do.
It was consistent with my personality. I think I've always been some form of an activist.
So there you go. I mean, that's his personality. He's not the kind of person to just write a letter. He's the kind of person to call up the CEO and say, I'm going to buy stock in your company and I'm going to make you make the company better as I see it. So I think if you view it in that way, the Harvard situation, the anti-Semitism situation might look from afar like big institutional evolution that has all of these different players and constituencies. No. Bill Ackman's world is very different. It's that, of course, you can call the CEO and say, hey, I'm a stockholder. I have a better idea than you do, because that's the way that money is made at that echelon. I think that's also why some people looked at Bill Ackman like, who asked you? I think from his point of view, he's like, I'm an alumnus. I have every right to be involved in this conversation, and I'm not just going to work my way up. I'm calling the CEO. That might seem kind of startling to some people, but I think when you look at it in that regard as an activist investor, it makes a lot more sense. I do think, though, that one of the pieces that is coming out of this, though, well, there are two pieces. One is how Bill Ackman is using his platform, because the whole fight over plagiarism is not about anti-Semitism per se. So I do kind of wish that in that interview that Andrew Ross Sorkin had asked more directly, just flat out, is this what your dad would have wanted? Your dad didn't ask you to go after plagiarism at MIT. He asked you to go after people who think that Jews are subhuman. That's the point. Is this what your dad wanted? Would he be pleased with this? I would have asked that. Wouldn't you? I mean, isn't that a relevant question? Isn't that a germane question? We were talking about keeping Jewish kids safe on campus, which everyone can support. Now we're going after plagiarism? What? What does that have to do with keeping Jewish kids safe and making Palestinian kids feel respected at college campuses? What does that have to do with anything? Now remember, Business Insider looked into the thesis that Bill Ackman's wife, Neri Oxman, did when she was at MIT and found some examples of the same kind of plagiarism that Claudine Gay apparently committed with some of her previous work. We talked on this program before that plagiarism can take many different forms. There's plagiarism, and then there's plagiarism, and then there's plagiarism. It's the difference between, oh, I forgot to put quotation marks there, or I did my footnotes wrong, and I'm stealing your idea. Those are two very different things. Bill Ackman, in his interview with CNBC, said plagiarism is a kind of fraud. That is incorrect. Plagiarism can be a kind of fraud, but it can also just be a kind of neglect. It can be an error, literally a clerical error. The issue is, what was the mistake? Why did you make it? And how do we fix it? But plagiarism is not all created equal. So be wary as you follow this debate of people who tell you that plagiarism rises to this enormously high level that has to be dealt with a hammer from Mount Olympus. Not necessarily. Maybe you just screwed up your footnotes, and all you need to do is fix the footnotes, but you attributed it properly in the piece. That also has come up with Claudine Gay and Neri Oxman, where they had ideas that they attributed, but they didn't formally structure the attribution well enough to avoid getting into the edge definitions of plagiarism. That's the larger issue, at least with those two. So when Bill Ackman says plagiarism is fraud, he's flattening the issue in ways that should not include his wife, because it does not appear that she did anything fraudulent, but she did commit plagiarism, a lesser form of it. And I think linguistically, he might be making it harder for the controversy around his wife to go away by fighting through that in a way that's much more categorical and aggressive. Let me get to one of your comments from the chat. Skylar the Writer writes on YouTube, damn, that question about his dad, that's deep. Maybe, but it's fair, I think. He put the thing about his dad out there, and I think that's worth hearing. But is this what your dad would have wanted? Do you believe that your father, in his dying wish, would say that you're doing what he asked you to do? Would your father feel good about the way that you're handling this so far? Or are you still, as you said in your account of this, distracted by other things? It seems like he was distracted by other things when his father said, you're not doing enough, and he dismissed it. And he's gotten distracted by other things now. Remember when this was all just about helping Jewish kids at college? The good old days, right? I would like this to be about that again. I could totally support that. But this feels kind of picayune. Plus, when you hear from the CNBC interview how he's going about this, you can tell that he's not he's double talking a little bit, and we need a little bit more clarification. One of the things that Andrew Ross Sorkin asked him about was whether or not he was going to pursue legal action against the company that owns Business Insider. Remember, Business Insider put out the report about Neri Oxman's work. She confirmed that the mainstream of the report was real and said, I'm going to get in touch with MIT and get the citations fixed. Good for her, which is the right thing to do. To note, Professor Claudine Gay also did the same thing. So that's all cool. And then Bill Ackman went after Business Insider, the publication. Business Insider said, we're going to investigate the report. They did so, put out a statement, said, we stand by the reporting. We stand by our reporter. So Andrew Ross Sorkin asks about that and about the way in which he's going about dealing with this. Here's part of what Bill Ackman said about how he's handling this.
But let's put it this way. If you wrote a story saying Bill Ackman admitted to insider trading, which is the academic equivalent of what they said about my wife,
Right.
I would call you. But if you didn't change the story, I would go to your editor. If your editor wouldn't fix it, I would go to the president. Right. I would go to the ultimate control person. And that's what I've done here. First, we object to the story to the Business Insider people. And when they do nothing, then we complain to the Axel Springer management team or the board. And when they do nothing, then at the end of the day, Henry Kravis controls 48% of the vote of this company. With a phone call, he could fix this.
A little context about what he said. Axel Springer is the company that owns Business Insider. Henry Kravis is a very wealthy investor, runs a company called KKR, and that owns 48% of this institution. So Bill Ackman says, if I don't like the story, I go to the reporter, then the editor, and then I work my way up the chain. What did he actually do in this situation? Based on what he told Andrew Ross Sorkin earlier in the interview, not what he said he would do. Here's the way he put it.
Well, the first thing I did was call someone I knew on the Business Insider board. But again, this is why we're going to stand up this organization.
So he didn't do what he said he would do. The first thing he did, by his own admission, was call someone on the board. He's double talking. He said, well, we'll start with a reporter and then I'll work our way up. But he just acknowledged, and Andrew must have missed it, that he did not do that in this case. Did he forget? Was he lying? What happened? That's the kind of thing that you have to wait a minute, you just said that you wouldn't do that. Should have called him on it, and he didn't. That is the way an activist investor works. There is no reason to believe that someone who is used to dealing with CEOs would talk to the receptionist. And let me tell you something, having dealt with a lot of C-level executives and elected officials and government leaders and people who just don't like the press, we are basically like a half step above the receptionist and maybe below the janitor in the minds of how some people in power regard us. He said he would talk to the reporter and the editor, but then he acknowledged he did not. That's not the way he did it. And by the way, here's something I don't think that Bill Ackman is thinking of. Do you really think that a reporter who's confident in their story is just going to shut up because you told him to? Let's role play this all the way out. You're a smart guy. You're an institutional, you're an investor. You're an activist investor. You understand the way the world works. Let's role play this out. Suppose I report a story about you. You don't like the story. You come after me to my boss. My boss comes to me and says, lay the story out for me. I lay it out, and my boss goes, you reported this correctly, goes back to you and says, the story is correct. If you'd like to comment, we'll let you. You get mad, you go up to the next editor and to the publisher and then to the parent company, and let's suppose you do get me fired. You know what you just did? You just released me into the wild, where I can go up one side of your ass and down the other with the exact same story you don't like, and now you have no one to call. I can go start a Substack or a podcast or a YouTube channel or get on Instagram and just ream you every single day with the report you thought you could suppress. You can't have that anymore. It's not like I have to work for this one company to do journalism. I can do journalism in the wild. And if Bill Ackman thinks that he can suppress or control this reporting by putting pressure from ownership up high, I mean, good luck. You're about to get an object lesson in the First Amendment. It don't work like that. It never did. And I wish that he would do the thing he said he was going to do. If he went and talked to Business Insider, this would probably mostly go away. And by the way, what does this have to do with protecting Jewish kids at college? That's the real issue. But look, do your thing, spend your money. He says he's going to stand up some kind of an organization to deal with issues of plagiarism at college campuses and go through past dissertations and reports and kind of hunt for new ways to deal with all this. Maybe that'll be useful. I don't know. Maybe there's new tools that can be used, AI that can be used to try to go through citations and look for plagiarism. Okay, maybe. But if you think you can suppress a story like that, show me, right? Show me. NBC News didn't want the Harvey Weinstein story. What does Ronan Farrow do? He goes to the New Yorker, reports it out anyway. He leaves and goes to someone who wants it. That's not how this goes away. Come on, man. You're supposed to be more worldly wise than that. Two other things you should note before we move on from this. One is that Bill Ackman has gotten more politically active. You may have heard of a Democratic presidential candidate named Dean Phillips, who is polling well behind Joe Biden, but is trying to put himself forward as an alternative to Joe Biden, someone younger, someone who's better fit for the party today. Bill Ackman has thrown his support behind Dean Phillips. They did an audio chat on X through X's system called Spaces, where they talked about Dean Phillips's campaign. Bill Ackman has also given $1 million to the Dean Phillips campaign. It seems like a rather long shot campaign, but Bill Ackman is now using his platform to get into political activity, which has everything to do with protecting Jewish kids on college campuses, just so we're all paying attention. Speaking of that Twitter chat, there was one piece of that Twitter chat that got some unpleasant attention because he said something that was questionable. One of Bill Ackman's longstanding complaints is about DEI programs, diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only in corporate America, but also at Harvard University, his alma mater. It's one of the things that he said he did not like about the way that Claudine Gay was running the university, and also about how Harvard's leadership more broadly, the Board of Overseers, the Harvard Corporation, and so on, were running the university. So in this Twitter Spaces chat where Dean Phillips, Elon Musk, who was on the chat, and another podcaster, forgive me, the podcaster's name escapes me, but where they were talking about this, one of the things that came up during this chat was MLK Day, which we just celebrated. And one of the things he said, that Bill Ackman said, was that the DEI movement went against the spirit of Dr. King's advocacy, specifically the I Have a Dream speech from 1963. Now, saying this in the presence of Elon Musk is already challenging because Elon Musk's views on race are questionable to say the very least. But Bill Ackman brought that up during this Twitter Spaces chat. And he said that the I Have a Dream speech, quote, and I'm quoting from Bill Ackman, according to this write-up from NBC News, quote, is precisely about a world where people will be judged not by the color of their skin, but the content of their character. And when I came to learn about the DEI movement, which is an ideological movement, it's really the reverse of that. Continuing to quote, I think Dr. King would be very opposed to this sort of ideology, even though, diversity is a good thing, even though, of course, a culture where everyone feels comfortable and included is critically important, unquote. Here's the issue with that. Dr. King never said that we are a colorblind culture. He said we have to work towards a colorblind culture. We're not there. The dream was not the plan. DEI looks more like something in the plan to achieve the dream. This is what white folks get wrong all the time. We don't become the nation of Dr. King's dream by acting like it and feeling like it. We become the nation of Dr. King's dream by becoming that nation we're not that nation yet. We will be. We're a hell of a lot farther along than we were when he lived and was killed. We are so much farther along. Are we there? Clearly not, because the people who he was talking about say we're not there. And by the way, Dr. King's dream was not just racial. It was also economic. His very last act, the last campaign he was part of before he was assassinated, was representing sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee in 1968. It was economic. The March on Washington, where he gave the I Have a Dream speech, the real full name was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. Jobs and freedom. It was economic as well as cultural, as well as racial. I think this misses the point. Plus, remember what I told you about Harvard's endowment? That they have been under pressure from a number of different sources, that they are trying to kind of expand the reach of the endowment. One of the economic underpinnings of Harvard University was that there is slave money that helped make Harvard happen. Harvard put out an enormous report a few years ago about its legacy of slavery on campus. Harvard's president owned slaves. Harvard had slaves working on its campus. And how do we know this? Because Harvard released a report where it disclaimed its own slave heritage. So you can't really disentangle those two things. And it occurs to me that if Bill Ackman really was serious about just helping Jewish students and dealing with these issues of diversity, there's already an infrastructure to deal with it. The DEI system at Harvard is probably significantly flawed and needs improvement, but so is every system that's designed to solve a gigantic cultural problem. I wonder if he maybe should have just stuck with it and gone in and done the activist investor thing to fix it, to improve it, rather than to destroy it and start over. Because Harvard's own history says that the work has to be done, that the university directly benefited from the ills of slavery. So what better way to address it than by going into that debate from the inside instead of crushing it from the outside? Maybe Bill Ackman's techniques will work. Maybe his tactics will succeed. Maybe Harvard will still reach the same aims anyway. But you already had an infrastructure there. He didn't tell Wendy's to shut down Tim Hortons. He told Wendy's to sell it and reinvest its efforts in improvement. He used that to generate value. What value is his advocacy against Harvard University generating? What will come of it? Maybe quite a lot. I don't know. We'll see. Right now, it's an open question. But don't say that you respect the journalistic process where you would go through all of these different channels and talk to people's editors when you know that's not the way you're wired. You are an activist investor by nature. Don't act like you're not, and don't act like you're cool with having that kind of a more democratized conversation. That kind of power brings a lot of influence, and he's going to use it as he sees fit. But I do appreciate him at least saying so. He's not being covert about it. He's being very straightforward about it. That at least is something I can appreciate. But I would certainly not expect him to start trying to work collaboratively with others anytime soon because, as he has shown us, that's not who he is. I just hope that what we do to try to fight hate, to fight anti-Semitism, makes all future generations proud. And I hope, as he figures out his path forward and his next move, that for his sake, whatever he chooses to do makes his dad proud. We'll see. Coming up, a quick primer on how to keep an eye on your government. Congress.gov is one of my favorite websites. I'm going to give you a quick crash course on how to use it, the first in a series of reports that I plan to put together for you on how to keep an eye on your government. There's an enormous amount of resources available. It's not that complicated. And now is a really good time to keep an eye on government because, well, it could be about to shut down on Friday. That's next. Welcome back. A little more time left before we go. I want to show you a piece. Well, before I get to that, I love the fact that more people are more skeptical of and critical of government these days. I think that that's not a bad impulse to have. We don't have to just take what we're told at face value. We should be asking smart questions. We should be trying to understand things for ourselves. There's a Bible verse that says, "In all you're getting, get understanding." I like that idea, that I don't just want to be handed something. I want to understand it, even if I don't understand everything about it. The more I understand it, the more I can trust it. That's also a double-edged sword. Today, Philip Bump put out a piece in the Washington Post about doing your own research. You know how people say, do your own research. Don't just believe what I have to say. Do your own research. That depends on what kind of research you're doing. He cites a recently released study that came from the University of Central Florida, NYU, and Stanford about people doing their own research on the internet. And what they found, perhaps, is not surprising. Quoting from the research, they find when individuals search online about misinformation, they are more likely to be exposed to lower quality information than when individuals search about true news. And, quote, those who are exposed to low quality information are more likely to believe false and misleading news stories to be true relative to those who are not, unquote. So it's kind of garbage in, garbage out. And I think also this is the problem with searching online for anything, because you are in an environment that is about bringing you the links you are most likely to click on. So Google and YouTube and TikTok and all of the others, Twitter and all the other sites you go to for information are not going to send you links that contradict what you would probably like. That's how those algorithms work, because you're more likely to click things that reaffirm what you already think. It's classic confirmation bias. So how do you search for things related particularly to our government that are useful and that are not deceptive? I would go to the source. If you want to understand what's happening with Congress, for example, go do your research with Congress. Now, that doesn't mean you have to fly to Washington and go down Constitution Avenue and on somebody's office door and say, can you show me the book of Congress, please? Can I see the Congress book? That is not what we're asking for. But that Congress book is online. And there's a lot of other stuff online too. And I think that it is high time. You're old enough now. You seem responsible. I'm giving you the keys to the internet. Drive it carefully. Bring it back in one piece. Don't scratch it. And I want to show you how to drive through information online so that you can know for yourself what the government is doing. The questions you're asking about how things are spent and why did they make this decision and what's going on and who does this and where is this person today and what are they talking about? Completely valid questions. They also have their own answers. And I think in addition to improving the way we do journalism in this country, we also need to improve the way we do education in this country and do knowledge in this country. And you can do that for yourself while people like me work on improving the journalism side. So let's talk about your part in this relationship. Not just, oh, the media needs to be better. Well, okay, well, we're working on that. What you doing? You gonna help? Or are you just gonna sit there and piss and moan from the back of the classroom? Or are you actually gonna do the homework? I think you can do the homework, and it's not as hard as you might think. Let's start just with something that is coming around the corner right now, which is that we are facing the possibility of yet another government shutdown. Yay. Here's a piece from Punchbowl News that came out on Monday on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, referring to a stopgap funding bill that House and Senate leaders released on Sunday night. It would expend the government's spending authority until March 1st and March 8th. It's in two parts because there are different parts to the way that these bills are written. So if there was a government shutdown, it would shut down in parts, not like every federal function would cease to happen. It would happen in bits and pieces. So you go to this link. There's a link, stopgap funding bill. That's got a hyperlink. You click that and you get the text of this bill, H.R. 2872. Okay, so here's the text of the bill. What do I do with this? What you do is you go to one of the best websites on earth. I'm telling you, this is one of my favorites. If you want to look like a G, when you're looking at government information. If you want to look like the most insidery insider or just win a few beers at the bar, this is a website you need to go. What website do you go to look up what Congress is doing? Congress.gov. It is actually that simple. This site is so damn useful. Congress.gov. Let me show you around. Let me give you a little tour of this wonderful website. First of all, because it is a .gov website, that means it is an actual official U.S. government site. All official U.S. government sites at this level end with .gov. Congress.gov is basically a search engine for Congress. You can type anything in up here and get all kinds of information on the current Congress. You can search every Congress, like everyone ever. You can make it specific to legislation, materials that committees have considered for committee hearings, or the big book O Congress, which is called the Congressional Record. That's the book that lists everything that goes on every day at Congress. It also shows you the most viewed bills, the legislation that other people are searching for the most often. The biggest one is the National Defense Authorization Act. That's the military budget bill. There's one called the Disease X Act, which would put funding into finding the next pandemic before it happens. You can search bills by their sponsor, by when they were introduced. You can search the status of appropriations, which is government spending, and on and on and on. Scroll down a little further. What's Congress doing? Here's the House of Representatives. Click right here. You can get the live video of what's going on at the U.S. House. Right now, they're in recess. And it says right here, underneath the play window, last floor action, the Speaker announced that the House do now recess. The next meeting is subject to the call of the chair. So they're in recess until the Speaker reconvenes the House. Well, what were they doing before? Here's a list of everything that happened right next to the video window. This is what they've done today. 207, rule provides for consideration of. There's this bill. 202, approving the journal agreed to by voice vote. 1:30, House convened returning from a recess, continuing the legislative day. 12:03, 1-minute speeches. All the way, 12 o'clock. Today's prayer was offered by the House chaplain, Chaplain Margaret Grun-Kibben. You can see everything that they've done today. And this is put together by the clerk of the House of Representatives. One other thing to bear in mind, the information here is not coming from the members of Congress themselves. It's coming from Congress, from the institution of the clerks of Congress. It's almost the difference between getting information from the hotel manager and from the hotel's guests, right? They're both maybe staff, like if you're a high-profile guest, but you want it from the institution. This comes from the institution of Congress, not controlled by the parties and not controlled directly by the members. So this is a different kind of information than you would get in some other places. There are also some links to make life a little easier to search through things kind of quickly. You can look at what happened yesterday in Congress, the text of pending bills, the schedules of committees, and the reports from committees. They're all listed right here under, you can see it right at the top of the webpage, below the search panel. Scroll down a little bit, you have another list of links that says recent. That's what all this is. There's one big daily digest of everything that happens called the Congressional Record. It's basically what all did Congress do today. This is an official document that goes all the way back to the beginning of Congress. And you can search the congressional records going back as far as 1873 on this website. Further back, you might have to go through some old dusty volumes and crack them open. But the Daily Digest, the measures that were introduced, there were 6 bills, and it lists what the bills were. Measures from the House, executive communications, which would be messages that come from the White House to Congress. 2 record votes were taken today. Senate convened at 3, adjourned at 9:10 p.m. until today at 11 a.m. This is all Eastern time, of course. So you can look through the congressional record and see, what is my government doing? There's a list. This is a list of everything that happened yesterday. You can also search through the committee meetings that are happening. 2 p.m., House Veterans Affairs Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations. Click that. What's the hearing about? Here's the information. VA revolving funds. Are veterans being shortchanged? ? And it will list who the witnesses are, their biographies, their testimony, their written testimony, supporting documentation, the notice of the hearing, which is when they say this hearing will be held on this date at this time at this place about this topic. Here's who's going to be testifying. This is where all this preliminary information is. The website for the committee. The video of the proceeding will show up here after the hearing is over. So all of this information is very easily searchable, and it's all right there on the surface. You do not have to dig for any of this. The other nice thing about Congress.gov is that if you're just not sure about all of the ins and outs of government, this is kind of an easy place to go get information. There's an annotated constitution here that explains the United States Constitution, the text of it, the way it was brought together, and even some featured issues. For example, we were talking a lot about the 14th Amendment to the Constitution recently as it relates to Donald Trump. They have features here about the disqualification of a candidate on that basis. It's 2 parts, at least so far. Click right there, takes you to a report about the disqualification of a candidate for the presidency. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. If you want to look like a congressional insider, this is hack number 1. You have to have this in your back pocket. That link I showed you from constitution.congress.gov, that's the Congress's own page explaining the Constitution. And again, this is a page that is maintained by the institution of Congress, not by the members themselves. So this page is updated regardless of what party is in power. So I clicked that link. It opened this other report from the Congressional Research Service. Well, who the hell is the Congressional Research Service? If a member of Congress wants to learn more about a subject for the sake of making legislation or even just advocating a policy, they can go to the Congressional Research Service and say, I want to know about X, research X. And so the Congressional Research Service, which again, this is congressional staff, not political staff, they will go off and get information and compile it into a report and say, here's a quick primer on the subject you asked us for. It is the research arm of Congress, just like the name says. So when this was coming up about whether Donald Trump is allowed to even be president again under the 14th Amendment, that's the Congressional Research Service's job. And in a document of 8 pages, you can become an expert in this. And the thing is, they do these on a lot of different subjects. So let me show you how to search it. And again, if you want to look like a genius on any complex topic that's a matter of policy or law or government or making a new law or what is the country going to do, go to the Congressional Research Service. This is a really easy way to become an instant expert. If you want to be an instant expert, this is the way you do it. Suppose you want to learn about border security. Congressional Research Service. You can find it either from the homepage on congress.gov. It's right. Hang on, I just had the link handy. Here we go. You can look under search CRS reports, or you go to crsreports.congress.gov. Suppose you want to learn about border security. Border security. Search. It will bring you back a whole bunch of reports about border security, including one called U.S. Customs and Border Protection's Powers and Limitations, a primer. This is your 5-page summary of what Customs and Border Protections does and doesn't do. And it's got the date right at the top. So, okay, updated November 30th, 2021. Do you want something more recent? Go back, search by date. Boop. And then everything related to borders pops up. Russia's war on Ukraine, U.S. policy and the role of Congress, Israel and Hamas conflict in brief, U.S. policy and options for Congress. This is a 16-page summary updated last week with everything you basically need to know about the conflict, the location, the players, U.S. policy, possible potential post-conflict scenarios. It's all in there. This is the information that your members of Congress are using to make their own decisions. So if you want to understand what they're being told and you want to advocate something different, or even if you want to support what they're trying to do, this is how you inform yourself, because this is how they can inform themselves. Now, does every member of Congress read all of these reports? I wish they did. But Is this an easy way for you to not feel like, oh my God, it doesn't make any sense? Yes, you are paying for this. These are your tax dollars at work. And it's a really amazingly useful website. There is so much information in here, it's startling. One more site you should know about. What about how the government uses our money? Who can help us with that? There's another website you should know about, an agency called the Congressional Budget Office. This is another analytical agency that helps Congress. Now, the Congressional Research Service is different. CRS is more about researching topics. Tell me what I need to know about X. And then CRS puts together a report. All of which are written in very plain English, and most of which are pretty brief. But what about researching a bill? Like, what is this bill going to do, and how much is this going to cost? That's the job of the Congressional Budget Office. They do analysis of legislation, pending legislation. They also do analysis of broader topics. So when you look at a bill, you can see on that bill, often there will be a CBO analysis that says this bill will cost this much money over this much time. This bill will do these things and needs to be approved because there are laws on how this money is used or that money is used, and it'll just lay it all out. CBO also does other reports just about the economy in general. Right now, they have a report called The Current View of the Economy from 2023 to 2025. So it's a projection of what we think the U.S. economy will do in the next few years. There's one here about a monthly budget review of the U.S. budget. There's also a report about how accurate their own projections are. So the Congressional Budget Office grades itself to say this is what we projected, this is what actually happened, and we can refine our models. They're constantly working to update that. Also a report on the distribution of household income in 2020. This is how household income was affected by COVID, by the pandemic. There's a scary amount of information here. But we're talking about a government shutdown before, right? So let's go back to that, to our example. You see the piece, Punchbowl News. You've got this article from Punchbowl, and then they move forward. Hang on one second. Let me get back to that link. I had the link. It was working perfectly until you touched it. Hang on, let me find this link. Give me just 1 second. Well, here, let me find it from somewhere else because I think we can still make that work. Actually, better way to find it. Better way to find it. We go up to congress.gov. Sorry, 1 second. And I'm going to look for one of the other things that you can do with congress.gov is look at the individuals in your government. For example, if you're trying to figure out, hang on 1 second, let me just find the website, who your members of the House are. You can go to house.gov. That's the main page for the U.S. House. That is a consistent page that remains there at all times. House.gov. Well, who are your members? Click representatives, it gives you a list of everybody. Who's in charge? Click leadership, it gives you a list of everybody. And a lot of these pages don't change. So Mike Johnson is now the Speaker of the House. Kevin McCarthy got booted. What's his website? Speaker.gov. That will be the website for him and for whoever the next House Speaker is, however long they may last. Also, other similar roles. The Democratic leader of the House is currently Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York. His website, democraticleader.house.gov. So a lot of these pages, if you just want to see kind of what's going on with these various leadership roles, it's the same page. The page just changes as the players change, but the page is still there. Majority Leader, Majority Whip, Republican Conference Chair, the Democratic Whip, and on and on. On the Senate side, go to U.S. Senate, you can click Senators, and it will tell you who all the senators are. But then there's this other link. See this one that says Facts and Milestones? If you go to senate.gov and click Senators at the top, there's a sub menu that says Facts and Milestones. This one gives you factoids about kinds of senators. So for example, how many African American senators are there? There's a link, African American senators, and it will give you the name of every African American senator in the history of the Senate, starting with Hiram Revels, who was the first one, who was a Republican from Mississippi, and going all the way now to LaFonza Butler, who was a senator from California, who filled the seat of the late Senator Dianne Feinstein. So right now, there are 4 black senators in the U.S. Senate: Tim Scott, Cory Booker, Raphael Warnock, and LaFonza Butler. What about senators who are Marines, who served in the U.S. Marine Corps? Here's a list. We have 3 senators right now who were United States Marines: Richard Blumenthal, Dan Sullivan, and Todd Young, presently. This is great if you, for example, have an issue that you want to get attention on and you want to try to find members of the U.S. Senate who have something in common with you. Maybe you're looking for people who are physicians because you have a healthcare related issue. There are 4 physicians currently serving the U.S. Senate: Roger Marshall, Bill Cassidy, Rand Paul, and John Barrasso. Suppose you are looking for senators who won the Nobel Peace Prize. There's none in the Senate right now, but there have been 5. The most recent one was Al Gore from Tennessee. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2007. So there's all kinds of information you can use if you just are like, who can I put this issue to? Who can I talk to who might have an idea of what I'm thinking about? Senators who are American Indian, senators who are foreign born. How many foreign born senators are there? I mean, this is right now, you've got Chris Van Hollen, born in Pakistan, currently a serving senator. So it's a huge trove of information. Let me try to get back to this link from Punchbowl that betrayed me when I needed it. There we go. All right, let's get back to this Punchbowl link. So you got the link from Punchbowl, stopgap funding bill. You click it. HR 2872. HR stands for House Resolution. Go to congress.gov, 2872. Search bar at the top, HR 2872, enter. Scroll down a little ways. As soon as I find my mouse, there it is. House Resolution 2872, 118th Congress. This is the current Congress. And then you click that, and it shows you the bill. To amend the Permanent Electronic Duck Stamp Act of 2013 to allow the Secretary of the Interior to issue electronic stamps under such act and for other purpose. What? Permanent Electronic Duck Stamp Act? What the hell? But don't lose hope. Here's what you got to do. Under this page that shows you the legislation, you see the overview. The bill's sponsor, Garrett Graves, congressman from Louisiana. The committees it's before, Natural Resources. When the committee met, reports on that. There is a Congressional Budget Office cost estimate, which is under the More on This Bill section. You click that, you'll get that. What's the last thing that happened on this? The Senate, yesterday, invoked cloture on the motion to proceed to the measure. So it's a procedural vote. How did they vote? Here's the record number, and you can see how the vote went right here. Everything related to this bill is on this page. Where's the piece about budget? You can read the whole text of the bill here, and you can here under amendments see that it was amended yesterday. Senator Patty Murray, Democrat from Washington, submitted the amendment. It's under her name. Yesterday's date. View text. Scroll down. And you can see here the Continuing Appropriations Act 2024 within the bill right here. There it is. Now, this language is arcane, so it helps to have a summary, a CBO analysis, a report on the bill. But here it is. Striking the date specified in the previous bill and inserting March 8th and March 1st. Those are the new deadlines if this bill passes. This is how we know that if this bill passed, it would move the funding deadline back to March 1st and March 8th. That's how we know it because it's written in the bill. Changes the funding level from $663 billion to $2.199 billion. That's the increased funding, the extended funding to keep paying for the government. It's all in this bill. This is the hard way to understand the bill, but this is the way to verify what's in the news report. You can look at it in the bill. It's all here. None of this is as hidden as people would like to believe. It is challenging because there's a lot to wade through, but if you know where to look, it's not that hard. There's not that much missing. And there's a huge amount of information you can just kind of grab off of the web if you know where to look for it. So, one more thing that everyone will probably be burning up quite a bit. So, the bill, again, HR 2872. One more great place to look. If all else fails, congress.gov, and if all else fails, C-SPAN. Go to cspan.org. It's an excellent place. They record everything. And if I search HR 2872, what do I get? The session of the Senate where they talked about this bill today. Click. 5 hours ago. And C-SPAN has labeled it. The Senate will continue work on a temporary spending bill funding the federal government past Friday's midnight deadline in 2 stages to March 1st and March 8th to avert a shutdown. If they're live in session, you can watch it live right here. You can also create video clips that are free to use that you can embed on a website or share to someone else. So suppose you wanted to say to somebody, oh yeah, that thing we were talking about, they talked about that in the Senate today. Here's what so-and-so said. You can go to C-SPAN and make your own clip. If you have a cspan.org account, and that's c-span.org, you can make your own clips and save them. And then go right down here. What's that bill number again? I forgot it just that quick. 2872. 2872. In the transcript, there it is, right there. And once you watch an ad, which takes a few seconds, then you can go right into C-SPAN.
President pro tempore.
Under the previous order, the leadership time
There they are.
is reserved.
Talking about the bill.
Morning business is under the previous order. The Senate will resume consideration of the motion to proceed to H.R. 2872, which the clerk will report.
There's the bill.
Proceed.
Found it. C-SPAN, just like that. I totally respect that people feel a need to put very tight controls on government. That's why our revolution happened, right? That's why we founded this country. And I totally get the skepticism about what government is telling you and what you can learn about what's happening and what people will reveal and what they won't tell you. That's all very fair. No one does this alone. But I think we're going to get farther faster in the work of trying to improve government and make government more accountable if we all do it together. Don't just offload this to the media, right? Don't just offload this to Washington. Don't offload this to anybody. Don't offload any of the work of democracy on anyone else but you. You do your part by remaining an educated voter, an educated citizen. I'll do my part by being a journalist who keeps trying to improve his work. And somewhere in the middle, together, we'll get farther faster. But it's no one person's job. There is a piece of this you can do for yourself. And I don't need nobody to do nothing for me that I can do for myself. I will continue to bring you more of these if these are useful. And I hope that you find this useful. I see Skylar the writer, I see your comment saying this is a nifty little website. This is what I wish politicians would show their constituents since civics classes aren't standard in schools. Skylar, I hear you on that. I do wish they would talk more about that too. But hey, I will talk more about this. There are other sites as well that will give you a deeper look at every corner of the U.S. government. I'm going to put together another one of these on administration websites, so department websites, the Supreme Court, the budget, the national debt. There's a lot of information out there, probably more information than you want. And then just other parts of the government that I think you should know about and know how to dig through that. If you have ideas for what you'd like to see more of, let me know. Write it in the comments. Get in touch with me. Send me an email. If you have ideas, I'd be happy to help walk you through this. Or if there's any of this that didn't quite make sense or you could use a little more clarity on, let me know. I'd be happy to help you out. But you should have access to all this information. You should absolutely be able to learn all these things that I learn. And a lot of what reporters do is just knowing where to find something that most people don't know how to find. And now you do. And isn't that a nice feeling? Knowing how to do things for yourself and just kind of take care of yourself, and you can live out your Woodward and Bernstein fantasy just spelunking the corners of congress.gov. Now you know what I do on a boring Friday night. Hey, I appreciate you making time. Remember to go to my Linktree site to follow me on YouTube and on all the socials. Put a few dollars in the online tip jar if this is useful, or get in touch with me. Tomorrow we'll be talking more about the run-up to New Hampshire and the ongoing primary races. There's also a Supreme Court case or two that I think you might want to pay attention to, and I'll have a little bit more on that. So until we meet again, I am Joshua Johnson. Thank you very much for making time for me. Enjoy the rest of your day, and as always, my friends, keep on shining, because someone, somewhere, needs your light right now.